Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, there it is. Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you? How is your mute button working? Pretty good? Yeah, mine too. It's fantastic. All right, I think this is once again one of those warning signs. Probably ought to do something about that, but you know, can't tell for sure. Got one eye on the computer screens, one eye elsewhere. Not really looking at whether I got the button squarely or not. But okay, we're here. It's time to roll. Ready for another show? Yes, sure, fine, fantastic, wonderful, good. Let's go. I got one eye on everything today. It is Monday. Greg Dworkin's coming through with a raft of stories. We'll catch up on developments of the weekend, fallout from last week's hearing. Everybody's still talking about that. A lot of the writing that's going on, the digesting over the weekend. We'll catch up with a lot of that as well. I've got the younger son at the orthodontist without me today, getting some braces off, and so I've got one eye on that situation as well. It's a big day at headquarters, but we'll find out about it later. Perhaps I don't think there's going to be any kind of on-air announcement about it, other than congratulations here. All right, well, very good. So the hopefully all goes well, and everybody's happy when they get back. Many other things happening today. As a matter of fact, why don't we take this quick opportunity to catch up on two of our more recent donors who haven't gotten their on-air accolades yet. Their thank you to Joe Corral, I'm not certain how you would pronounce that. It's Corral, but is it? I don't know. Because when it's a surname, you never know how it's going to be pronounced. But I'll tell you what we appreciate is I can tell you that this has been waiting in the wings for some time now. Since July 6th. And I have this note card to myself that's here every day. And every day I say I'm going to begin the show. I'll thank Joe and do it right at the top of the show so we can get it out of the way. And it's been staring at me in the face. And every day I finish the show and say, all right, well, I'm glad that done. Geez. All right. But also Michael Lefkowitz, who's been waiting since the 11th of July. I've been quite remiss in thanking people, but at least July's not over yet. And, well, thanks to everybody. And one of these days, really, honestly, I will try and cut a new message. It's the hardest thing. Every day as I'm preparing the show for podcasts and cleaning things up and getting done with things, and I'm trying to rush through that. I want to get that done so I can get on with other work for the day. And I realize I have had, the same boring spots that are not, I don't think, any longer inspiring people to do the things that Joe and Michael have done today. But, it slows down to a trickle. And sometimes when you change the message, that helps. But then every day I'm like, well, it's getting late. It's time to get this thing out of here. I don't have time to record a new message and then match it up with music and then make it. It's not like the hardest thing in the world, but on the other hand, after you do 2 hours, right? I don't know. One of these days, I'm really going to set some time aside. Thanks to everybody who continues to support the show. It doesn't make much difference if Joe and Michael come on board and the rest of you abandon us. So thank you for your continuing support. Many of you for several years running now, just on Patreon alone, have been keeping us going and keeping it viable in the sense that I can point to some sort of cash flow here at home and say, it's not actually paying for anything here at home, but it is happening. And one day, we could have millions of listeners and we could be I don't know what. Okay. But at any rate, the point is we really appreciate if nothing else, finding out that there are people listening. That's a nice thing to know. And then you become part of the community. Occasionally we hear from you during the show. It's fantastic. Thank you very much. Greg Dworkin, who does all of this for nothing. Well, I suppose if we had millions of listeners, then he could do it for something. That would be a nice thing too, as well. So anyway, I appreciate all of you who contribute to the show in your various ways, including Greg, who just contributes because, I don't know, it's kind of fun and it's nice and you get to talk about things in the news and people like that. and people like to listen to it too, and that's good news. Thank you. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. It's fun. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I get to talk to an old friend, and it's good therapy.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's all that we should be charging you. It's so good. But that's the kind of people we are. We just like to do it pro bono.
$400 an hour. What do you think?
That sounds pretty good. What school is that I have to go to? Okay. Psychiatry. That sounds like a rough gig, actually.
Psychiatrists really do have a rough gig, and they are like the unheralded angels of this world.
Listening to everybody's problems, that's a rough job.
Well, not only that, doing something about it.
Oh, yes, right. Well, I mean, yes, we have, say, like priests and ministers and rabbis listen to everybody's problems, too, and try to do something about it. But I guess actually medically doing something about it, that's even harder.
So a lot going on, of course, yes, and it does revolve around January 6th committee, so we'll definitely cover a bit of that. But I want to start out with two separate interesting things about topics we often cover. For example, this one is from The Spectator, again, a very conservative magazine from England.
Really loving The Spectator. Okay.
All right. But this time, no, it's not about Liz Truss and Sunak and the Prime Minister clash. This is about something that I just found totally unexpected. Remember, this is a very, very conservative magazine, which often posts things like, oh, I'm glad it's warm.
Oh, right. Yeah,
it's about time we got into it, and we read some of those headlines just last week, I think. Yeah. But this one is from Sam Ashworth Hayes, and the reason it got my attention is the title and the piece. There's nothing conservative about climate change. And too long didn't read? Yeah, it's real, and there's no reason why we should be, arguing against it because we're conservatives. That's just stupid.
I see.
Right? The combination of 40 degrees C temperature and England feels about as natural a pairing as English football and winning, which is to say they don't go together at all. And you got to be a soccer fan to understand that. But just to remind you, 40 degrees Celsius is 104 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's plenty.
So plenty hot. God simply did not intend the two to go together. And although it feels odd to have to point this out, there's nothing conservative about believing climate change isn't a problem.
Yeah, there you go.
Turning England's green and pleasant land into scorched savanna should not really be on the manifesto of the least important backbencher. The manifesto is their policy positions, let alone anyone with an aspiration to influence policy. But this message has yet to penetrate the cranial shielding of some members of Parliament. Sir John Hayes told the Daily Telegraph, we find ourselves in a cowardly new world where we live in a country where we're frightened of heat. It's not surprising in snowflake Britain. The snowflakes are melting. Yeah.
Okay.
And then gives other examples. Now, I will admit that 125,000 years ago, hippopotamuses, lions, and elephants happily roamed the landscape, which would eventually become London. But surely not even the most ardent advocate of a return to a bygone era would recommend reverting to a time before Homo sapiens managed to make Britain inhabitable by killing off all the irritating megafauna. I wonder if the Supreme Court should have a tackle at that. They like going back to originalism.
Right, long-standing tradition of hippopotamus.
Yeah, they're talking about 200 some odd years of originalism. Maybe they should go back 125,000 years.
Megafauna have standing.
Right? Being relaxed about the runway melting, as it was reported to have done on Monday, is fundamentally unconservative. To love England is to love its weather, as frustrating damp as it can be. If nothing else, it's a vital habitat for the critically endangered medium-pace swing bowler, unable to survive in the harsh conditions of southern test pitches. There you go. English writing.
That was, super English.
It's all about cricket.
Holy cow.
Right? British meteorological patriotism demands summers that are suitable for cricket, for loafing and open-air productions of Shakespeare, the sort of weather you can bring a coat just in case. Having lived in Australia, I can't in good faith recommend it as a habitat suitable for lizards, mammals, and other things, basically what he's trying to say, that are trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Right? Well, but in refusing to pace up to the climate change, it's difficult to shake a suspicion that some Tory MPs are acutely aware that people who make or break them, the party members, are on average 57, And as the Tory MP Chris Skidmore has pointed out, when you cast the question, is net zero by 2050, 90% of our constituency will be dead.
Oh,
So you get an idea right there of why the Conservatives in England aren't especially keen on talking about this. Yes, it's a problem for the grandchildren, but that's the grandchildren's problem, not us. So it's basically British gimmitarianism, as you might put it.
Yes. I don't know if that would spell. Yeah, I can't think of a different word that they would use. So, yeah.
Well, they'd spell it wrong anyway. But
yeah,
see,
right.
the idea
the
here
U
is
in there somehow.
You've got conservatives making the case that climate change is real. We're feeling it. It's really stupid to ignore it. And there's nothing conservative about like being a climate change denier.
Yes, and there's a million different places where people jump off and pretend there's nuance. Conservatives who say, well, climate change is real, it's just not man-made, or, it's cyclical. Well, and then, of course, the hardcore, which is it may or may not be man-made, but what the hell are we going to do about it? We need to have gasoline, and that's all there is to it. I mean, there's a bunch of different kinds of weirdos. But yeah, he's right. I always wondered about why conservation and conservatism didn't seem to go together.
Well, they normally do. In the old days, it used to be the guys with guns, which is to say the hunters, that were most into protecting the environment.
That is true, too. They wanted to make sure there were more animals to shoot.
But that's okay. The point is that you can find alliances and you can find common ground in the weirdest places, and you should always go for it. So, if the conservatives are trying to make the case that, it's really important to do something about climate change because we want to preserve what we've built, our airports and everything else that might melt. Sure. It's exaggerating to say Britain is melting. Well, actually, it is melting.
Yeah, but they had
literally melting
roadways, and I think they said runway at the airport. It was.
People are trying to paint train tracks white so it can reflect some of the sunlight and not buckle. And, it's bad. So good for them. Yeah. I just want to point out that things change glacially for talking about climate change, but sometimes they do change.
Yes, and. You have to be a really fast painter, unless you paint behind the trains.
Well, go to Alaska and see how the glaciers are disappearing, and
all over Europe.
It's not so fast. It's over like decades, not centuries.
Yes, right. And Greenland having another big summer melt again.
Yeah.
They're European.
So here's a different story. Also, something that is important to cover, and we've covered a lot of it. But this is a Timothy Snyder piece on Twitter. He's a historian. This is from the Pundit Roundup, but I'll put it here so you could find it easy.
Oh, well.
And it's about Russia.
All right.
And he makes the case that Putin's rule is weakening, and we see regularly now from people aside from Putin, like Prime Minister and President Dmitry Medvedev, about the meaning of the war. I always confuse him with a conservative commentator here in the U.S. About Mike Medvedev, I think. The catastrophic consequences that await Ukraine and the West and so forth. This is a sign that Putin is losing control. Usually the news coverage of such pronouncements focuses on the content, and it's tempting to get caught up in Russian fear propaganda. But the real story is that people aside from Putin now feel authorized to make proclamations. And before the war, there was a lot less of this.
Okay.
So the doom propaganda serves a couple of purposes. On the surface, it shows loyalty to Putin. At a time when Russia's losing, the best hope is to convince the West that Russia's somehow unstoppable, which it isn't, of course. At the same time, the doom propaganda is rhetorical preparation for a power struggle after Putin falls. Too long didn't read. Basically, it's like what we see here in the U.S. with Republicans. Part of the reason to, like Elise Stefanik, is to be so ridiculous about how outrageous some of the things you say are, is to put yourself in a position where whatever happens, like Trump loses or January 6th committee gets people indicted, to say to the remaining Republican MAGA followers, look, I'm with you. Go back and look at what I wrote 2 months ago, 3 months ago. You see, I'm still just as extreme as you are. Don't turn on me now. I don't want to be running away from you the way Josh Hawley does. Right? So the whole idea is in Russia to position yourself so that after Putin falls, you can go back and look at the stuff that you said and say, you see, I'm a Russophile. I'm for Mother Russia. I'm for all of these things. vote for me, which is to say in secret session with the oligarchs, and make me king, make me czar, make me president. And so, it's just an interesting piece of maneuvering that this particular analyst is pointing out doesn't happen when Putin's under total control and all things are only said by him. When you've got other people trying to maneuver to pick up the mantle, it means they think that mantle has dropped or fallen.
Yes. All right. That's an idea.
Wish casting? I don't know, but it's just interesting because it hasn't happened before, but it's only happened since the war.
Well, we'll see if anybody falls out any windows.
Given and points out a couple of things. The Russian army is taking losses in equipment and in officers that threaten its integrity as an institution. They are basically stalled. For all those people who said that they were going to stall, they're stalled. Oh, we picked up 30 meters of ground. Yes, at a cost of, 800 men and 2 officers and all your equipment and the ammo depots. The Russian army is taking losses in equipment and in officers that threaten its integrity as an institution, not to mention its ability to fulfill its many other missions beyond Ukraine, like propping up Syria, for example. Sanctions make this worse. A world-class army is not one that goes hunting in Tehran for drones reverse engineered from Western technology, but that's where Russia is right now. Putin can survive the army not being strong, but at a certain point, not being strong becomes not looking strong. And the Russian army is also taking horrible losses in men, which suggests the next sign of Putin's weakness. The Russian state can mobilize its population only at the level of emotion. Russian regions now working hard to find highly paid volunteers, and that's in scare quotes, who are sent to die with little training. And Putin is clearly afraid that a general mobilization would undo his popularity and bring down his regime. In that sense, he's weak. And the Russian state looks fascist at the top, but it lacks the fascist capacity for total war. It's governed thus far by the demobilization of its population, not its mobilization. So the old communist joke went, we pretend to work and you pretend to pay us. In Russia today, the reality is something more like you pretend to win a war and we pretend to show enthusiasm.
Okay. Well,
Putin has soft support for this war so long as it's a TV show, but can't count on Russians to risk their actual bodies. And so the dramatic rhetoric on Russian TV and on the Telegram channels of Russian leaders is rather a substitute for the evidence of a national consensus. So as long as everybody says nationalistic things, a certain equilibrium is preserved. But that amounts to everybody bluffing everybody else. And the equilibrium that keeps Putin in power, mastery over rivals, soft support in the population, integrity of the army, is challenged by the realities of an unpredictable, costly war. So the trap presented to Putin by rivals, by the public, by the army looks like this. We will agree with you, we're winning the war, and we'll all blame you when we lose it.
Yeah, well,
if we lose it.
I think
and this is all clouded by emotion, displacement, and fear, but that's a general picture. So it's not clear how Putin escapes that, except by declaring victory. So he's gambling that the West will feel the pain faster than he will, but the fact of the matter is it's a gamble. And he concludes by saying, Putin seemed like a good gambler, but a good gambler knows when to fold. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Putin absolutely positively at this point, given that he's thrown everything in from his perspective, cannot afford to lose. And yet, some military analysts think that by mid-August, Russia is going to be in terrible shape in Ukraine with a counteroffensive by Ukrainians and with long-range artillery taking out Russian depots, generals, and key spots, which is happening already. So very interesting situation that isn't necessarily covered by our press, who always put it in terms of Russia pauses before resuming offensive. Who thinks they actually can resume the offensive? Where does it say that they can? You're just assuming they can because that's like the whole perspective you have eaten, swallowed, and digested and made your own. And that's not necessarily the reality on the ground. Now, Ukraine has its own problems. They don't have infinite resources, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, things really don't look like they're going well for Russia now or in the near future.
I guess not.
Which is going to put Putin at risk, and that's the whole point of this piece here. So keep that in mind when you hear about, Ukrainian and Russian updates. Trying to get what angle they're coming from, who's saying it, why they're saying it, et cetera, et cetera. I don't trust the Western press that isn't military oriented on this. It's not that you have to trust the military people, but they're looking at it with a much better perspective than the Politico reporters. And this is one of these cases where expertise really does matter. Just think about the whole thing we learned about Russian tires.
Yeah, right. Well, we're learning a lot. We have the luxury of standing by and learning. So might as well do it. Learn now before it's happening in your neighborhood and you have to learn on the fly.
Right, exactly.
I guess. Okay.
I mean, who knew we'd be celebrating really catchy Euro songs about Turkish drones.
No, right. I know. It comes to mind every once in a while. Every time there's a Trump rally, I think about that song.
Right, exactly. So back in the U.S.,
yeah,
January 6th committee continues to make news, even though they're not having active hearings right now. Liz Cheney, for example, was on the Sunday shows, and she said this. Liz Cheney says they're, quote, fully prepared to contemplate a subpoena, end quote, for Ginny Thomas, wife of Clarence Thomas, if she doesn't come in voluntarily. Also says missing Secret Service texts are, quote, deeply troubling, end quote, and says on CNN to Jake Tapper, we will get to the bottom of it.
All right.
Which is awfully interesting. Awfully interesting.
Yes, and awful.
Awfully.
I hope it's really true and good. Okay. Was she on every single show, or was she just on
Was she
for
doing
a
the full
long
Monty?
time?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
she said
know.
that to Jake Tapper, and that's the only one I saw.
Okay, I didn't watch them at all.
I didn't watch them at all either. But Manu Raju, CNN reporter, reported that she was on CNN.
Yeah, all right. So there's at least that one. I don't know. I assume that she made the rounds, but not that important. We're not that upset if this time she does do that.
So don't make the silly mistake of, she said contemplate. Why didn't she just send the marshal to the Supreme Court to go,
Yeah.
They're doing what they do in the process that they do it. They're giving them the chance to negotiate, and then the subpoenas come. They'll take as much time as they feel like they need to. Well, why isn't she doing Clarence? Well, it's because Ginny's texts are the ones that are to Mark Meadows.
Yes, also. She's the vice chair. We want the chairman doing these things. I mean, for one thing. She's not the chair. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, for one thing. She won't be. It's, you're reminding us all the time. Temporary ally on a very narrow subject. You're getting what you're getting.
Yeah. On this particular case, and you can step back and say, why would she be and why would the committee be so reticent to subpoena Ginny Thomas? I think the clear answer to me, which is so obvious that people are going to overlook and say, it's got to be something more because we live in a Q world. But the fact is, I think that they, as true conservatives, would actually like to preserve the standing of some of our institutions, including the Supreme Court. There's no question this is going to make the Supreme Court look even worse than they are at a time that they're already having their legitimacy questioned for very good reasons.
Yes.
But if you're really trying to prop up institutions as a bulwark against a Republican Party that wants to tear all institutions down, then subpoenaing Ginny Thomas and dragging the Supreme Court into it is not your first move.
Probably not. I mean, I think they'll eventually set it aside if they need to, and they'll do some groundwork on, there's a difference between Clarence Thomas and the Supreme Court. But, yeah, and also, I mean, I imagine that up until January 6th, Ginny Thomas and Liz Cheney might even have been close. I don't know how close, but they certainly were familiar with one another, moving in the same circles, and probably it's a difficult thing. Luckily, Liz Cheney doesn't actually have the keys and drive this, whatever the hell it is, this vehicle of the committee. She seems to, but
it's a Suburban.
She's not, in fact. Right, yeah. It's not the Beast, everybody. Please. Don't get confused. All right,
but it's got to be large enough to fit everybody. So.
Yes, I can imagine that
it
might be personally difficult to do, but not that difficult. I think she'd rather get. She's kind of all in now. She'll want to get to the bottom of it, and I don't know.
The question is, what does the committee have, and where do those tantalizing clues and hints actually lead? Mm-hmm. And so, if it's a question of following the money, and don't forget they have a Team Green. And Ginny Thomas is in any way involved, then, she's fair game.
Okay.
But we know she's involved with Tex the Meadow, so what else? And so that's, I think, part of the questions there.
Yes.
Now, as far as the Secret Service goes, that's also a very, very big deal. In fact, Will Bunch had a column about it this morning in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Break up the Secret Service and send its people to jail for the January 6th cover-up. Lock them up. And it is a cover-up.
Sure.
Right? So he writes, the irony of America in the 2020s is just too much. Consider the case of James Murray, the current head of the U.S. Secret Service and a 27-year veteran of the force best known for protecting presidents and their families. But earlier this month, Murray abruptly announced he's leaving to become the security chief for the parent company of Snapchat, the social media platform famous for messages that rapidly disappear. So let me rephrase this. Murray's leaving for a job at another outfit whose communications become untraceable.
That's true, too. That's an interesting move, but I guess that's it's almost retirement and let's get a bunch of money move. I can understand it, although it is
Sure, but why
sounding.
now, after 27 years? Because days after Murray announced his looming departure, it was revealed that nearly all of the Secret Service's text messages from the critical days of January 5th and 6th have been permanently deleted, despite warnings from investigators to preserve all communications. Look, I know it's now past the point of cliche to keep comparing the momentum-gaining January 6th investigation into the House and Watergate scandal. But as a teen Watergate geek watching today's crisis just as intensely, there's a highly Nixonian feel to the bombshell. Both scandals started with felonies, but also provided a key to open up the much deeper rot and then the cover-up.
Yeah, well, we're in the cover-up phase. I think the comparison's natural, and erased missing messages. That's hard to miss that
187 minutes of Rosemary Wood saying nothing happened. Look over there.
Okay. Well,
what about this other guy that did something 17 years ago?
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's continue our segment with Greg. We left off, I think we had summed up everything in the world, so there must be something else.
There's always something else. So it was interesting to me that during the break, I happened to come across this Hill article, The Hill. The Ohio State.
Yes.
Younger Republicans significantly more concerned about environment than older ones, according to Gallup. So American older Republicans are just as egalitarian as older Tories.
Yes.
You know, fact of the matter is, younger folks are much more concerned about the environment. Younger people have to vote. I don't know how many times this particular oldster has to tell you that.
Well, eventually
but if you don't like the way old people are running this place, get out and vote and elect some younger ones. Yes. Don't just sit home and complain about it, because nothing happens when you do that.
Right, but they're too conservative to vote. I guess, I don't know.
Meanwhile, on the campaign trail here in the U.S., many Republicans talk of violence, writes Dave Weigel. In both swing states and safe seats, GOP candidates say that liberals hate them and may turn rioters or a police state on people who disobey them. So basically, they're law and order candidates. We make the law, and you listen to our orders.
Pretty much, yes.
Right?
I think,
and gives Maryland as a recent example. Michael Perutka stood up at an Italian restaurant in Rockville and imagined how a foreign enemy might attack America. They'd make our borders porous. They'd make our cities unsafe. They'd make they'd ruin our economy. The country's at war, he said, and the enemy has co-opted members and agencies and agents of our government.
Yeah.
They have, but it's Russia and it's Republicans. It's Donald Trump,
true.
and it's Dana Rohrabacher, and I have no less a Republican highly placed source to make that case, which he did. Right, that would be Kevin McCarthy, of course.
Yes. I saw David tweeting about the article, or maybe somebody else tweeting about the article. I don't know. Someone else's comment on it that basically, this is a historical pattern. So good observation to make note of this, and it's just kind of the thing that fascists do.
Right, exactly.
Say,
it is the
I'm
thing
under
that
threat,
fascists do.
so I must strike.
Our friend Charles Gaba had a really clear answer to this. I saw somebody struggling with the idea of, so what do you call proto-Christian nationalists who are basically white Christian nationalists who are trying to foment violence around the country in order to try to get people to either be intimidated or to vote for their cause? And Charles Gaba said, well, we call them Nazis.
Yeah. Right, sure.
That's what they are.
That's pretty much it. They don't realize it yet, but
Now,
yes.
Perutka easily dispatched a more moderate Republican to win the nomination. State Delegate Dan Cox, who won Trump's endorsement, also dispatched a Republican endorsed by the state's popular governor, Larry Hogan. Both candidates described the country that's not merely in trouble, but being destroyed by leaders who despise most Americans, part of a civil war. In both swing states and safe seats, many Republicans say that liberals hate them personally. Right? And they may turn a police state on people who disobey them.
Yeah.
Referring to the coronavirus, we were told 14 days to bend the curve, yet Antifa was allowed to burn our police car. Do you think what we're seeing with the riots and everything that we should not have something to defend our families with? This is why we have a Second Amendment. I don't understand what they keep saying when they keep saying there's riots.
I don't know. It's true. That comes up an awful lot, and I think I saw maybe.
Never mind January 6th. What about all the other riots?
Right.
Other riots?
That's exactly what they say, and this I guess plays into the same observation I was talking about. Is that the right wing guys keep justifying the things they do by saying, "Well, yeah, but you see the liberals doing this all over the place, so we have to fight back." And then you look for like newspaper reports of the liberals having done any of these things, and they don't exist. But they've convinced themselves that they do exist, that those things did happen, and this is just retaliation, which is always fair because everyone knows that the second wrong makes a right. I think that's the way that old saying went, and they think so too. But the riot on January 6th, justifiable because, of course, every city in America was burned to the ground by Antifa, or however you want to say it, or Black Lives Matter. I saw other people commenting about this conversation, saying that they were. I mean, this is total anecdotal. I heard it from a guy who heard it from a guy thing, I guess. But somebody was saying that they were on a plane somewhere overhearing a guy who presented himself as an arch conservative at some point during the flight. I don't know how, but I guess he must have done so. Saying, as they overflew Chicago, hey, it looks pretty good from up here after all the damage that was done by the riots. And people are like, what riots? Yeah, Antifa, Black Lives Matter. They destroyed vast swaths of Chicago. Those are very old buildings down there. It did not happen. But not only did it happen in their minds, but it's justification for who knows what, wrecking everything, overthrowing the government, rioting on January 6th. We just had, I think, like the 1500th example of Republicans getting caught doing the very voter fraud that they are sure that all the liberals are doing. And the guy's excuse, I think, casting a ballot for his wife, who, by the way, has been missing for 2 years. They're casting her absentee ballot, and upon being caught, freezer. Yeah, it's a good spot. You might want to look.
Or being from where I am, check the wood chipper.
Yeah, crawl spaces. Chest freezers, wood chipper, the lake, everything, anything you can look for. But basically, his reasoning or his excuse was, well, I heard in the news, meaning I heard from Donald Trump at a rally, that all the Democrats were doing this. Since they're all cheating, I figured I might as well try and even the score. And again, somebody else pointing out and tweeting it around. This is what all of this undermining of confidence in elections does. One of the many things that it does is tell conservatives, you should do this too, and it's okay, because even if you get caught, it's unfair that you would be caught, because they've already done all these things. So they go out and do them, and then they get arrested. And, by the way, Donald Trump is nowhere to help you. He's not going to pay your legal bills. He doesn't care about you. He's not going to pardon you. Nothing. You just go to jail, and that's it. Sorry. The end. Happening a lot.
So a particular strategist, Rick Shafton, a conservative strategist working with Republican challengers this cycle, asked whether public safety was being degraded on purpose and pointed to government responses to the pandemic as a reason these voters were nervous. People paid attention to the truckers. Canada's supposed to be a democracy. Can that happen here?
What?
So, it's like the Brooks Brothers riot in 2000.
I guess.
I mean, when you stage something, whether it's the Tea Party or whether it's, money from wherever to pay for truckers to show up in Ottawa, you get people's attention. And if you're already prone to believe it and ask them, they'll say, of course I believe it. I was prone to believe beforehand. Look, now we have proof.
Yes. All right, there you
so
go.
Things happen, and they know it, and it's part of a bigger campaign. In fact, it's purposeful, said Sarah Palin, who's running in next month's special election, when she was interviewed with Steve Bannon.
Oh,
it's all about the fundamental transformation of America. You only fundamentally transform something for which you have disdain, which is to say, it's all about protecting white rights. But she didn't just come out and say it. She just wanted to say it as subtly as possible. So she was on Steve Bannon's show. And he'll say it later.
It's astonishing that she's like savvy and subtle by comparison to what we've unleashed in her wake.
Right.
She doesn't say things like that. I mean, that's like now skilled political operative move.
But don't get the impression that it's all working. It doesn't necessarily work. Things happen, and life has a way of intervening. This article in the New York Times, for example, reminds us, after recent turmoil, the race for Texas governor is tightening. A series of tragedies and challenges have soured the mood of Texans and made the governor's race perhaps the most competitive since the 1990s. And there's a litany of things. Deadly school shootings in U.S. history, one of them. Yes, revival of 20s ban on abortion, country's worst episode of migrant death. Electrical grid, which failed during bitter cold, straining under soaring heat. Death and difficulty facing Texans over the last 2 months have soured them on the direction of the state, hurting Governor Abbott, and making what they call a perennial candidate, ubiquitous Democratic challenger, Beto O'Rourke, tightening single-digit contest, and perhaps the most competitive since Democrats last held the office in the 1990s. So we'll see what happens. I wouldn't write Texas off. At some point, the environment does change. Remember, it's the media that sets a lot of what these so-called environmental conditions are. How do you do that? By rising gas prices, except not writing about it or talking about it when gas prices fall, which they are.
Yes, right, and precipitously at that. It's happening again still. So the daily report is that the average, more than the average price, but I think the most prevalent price out there, that's a new metric. I haven't seen that one, being posted at under $4 again. Then the second most prevalent price, $3.89. So that's better.
Yep, so it is better. So Liz Cheney, again, shows how to deal with the whataboutism that is part and parcel of Republican defenses. Oh, yeah, there was a riot, and they tried to kill Mac Pence. What about, I don't know, something that happened 17 years ago that I can barely remember, but I'll use it as an example because that proves my point.
Yeah.
Well, Liz Cheney on Fox News, in response to Brett Baer's question about if the January 6th committee is investigating Pelosi and the Capitol Police,
right.
she said, We're not going to do that, Brett. We're not going to blame the Capitol Police and blame those in law enforcement for Donald Trump's armed mob.
Yeah. So she was on at least two shows. That's one question answered. But yeah, that's a great answer and very deft. Not even, it's interesting, but even in the middle of that, she's very skilled. She's not going to say, look, Nancy Pelosi didn't do anything wrong. No, that wasn't quite the answer I gave.
But we're not going to blame the
Capitol
police for what Donald Trump did.
Yeah, that wasn't. I mean, the question was about blaming Nancy Pelosi. That was very slick of you. But
I know
of
what
course,
you're doing, and let me
yeah,
answer.
that's great. Yeah, I mean that's been a Republican
Right.
whataboutism move since forever.
But wait, there's more
Honestly.
she said.
Okay.
She also said the notion now that somehow the committee's incapable of getting to the facts of what happened because Kevin McCarthy withdrew his nominees is nonsense. It's also, by the way, a diversion.
Yes.
Right? Now, and then she said to Cheney said to Brett Barrett, look, it's not just me that's saying Donald Trump is unfit for office. It's other entities owned by Rupert Murdoch, the New York Post,
Yes,
the Wall Street
very
Journal.
big
And in
over the
fact,
weekend.
when it comes to that, the Post and the Wall Street Journal, within minutes of each other, posted,
Almost as though coordinated.
Donald Trump was just standing around on January 6th. Clearly, Rupert Murdoch is making a business decision that you're better off with DeSantis. He's got a better chance to win.
Yeah, I guess so, or at least longer term, better prospects. Why bet on the guy? You know, he's a little frail.
Right, just like that British
go and
conservative.
get-
Are you looking at the future, or are you just looking at the here and now?
Yeah, I mean, I think DeSantis is a better bet long term, just because I think he'll live longer. So, you know, he'll outlive Rupert Murdoch. I mean, almost anybody really at this point should be able to outlive Rupert Murdoch, but you know, whatever. He's transfusing vampire blood every night for all I know. He's a billionaire. So, yeah, that was a big deal over the weekend that the New York Post said he's rendered himself unfit for office in his inaction over January 6th. Many other things rendered him unfit for office, but they settled on one.
Right. And you young people who are deciding whether or not to vote and why should I support Biden? Biden's not on the menu. He's not on the election calendar for 2022.
Right.
But the environment certainly is. Lindsey Graham on climate in 2022. The Democratic Party has made climate change a religion and their solutions are draconian, he said.
Oh. You should talk to the guy in the Spectator.
I am reminded when I read that Lindsey Graham quote of a better quote from Upton Sinclair 100 years ago. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. And I would say the same about Joe Manchin.
Yeah.
Basically, look where they're from, look who's paying them, and I get it. But that's got nothing to do with reality, and you don't have to take what they say seriously. They're just defending where their money comes from.
Carpet business. Where would we be? The whole world would be carpeted at this point, but the environment might be better. I don't know. Although some of those carpets do produce an awful lot of gases in the home. So you never know. He was never really going to be a great guy, Joe Manchin. Okay.
Right. Meanwhile, Doug Mastriano, also a Nazi, consultant, and Gab CEO Andrew Torba. Jewish conservatives like Ben Shapiro aren't welcome in the movement, at least until they convert.
Right. Okay. I think I'm in favor of that.
Yes. And so, you know.
Fight. That'll be interesting.
Somebody should mention it to Ben Shapiro.
No, he will ignore that. That will never come up, and he will endorse Doug Mastriano nonetheless. That's very interesting. So,
Jennifer Rubin writes, you know, see,
consultant?
Ben Shapiro doesn't realize the people he's playing footsie with all think this. By definition, right-wing nationalists are anti-Semites.
Yeah.
So, is it unfair to call them Nazis? Well, you know, we report, you decide.
Yeah, I don't know. Was there any record of anti-Semitism among the Nazis? I am not sure. I think I understood that they were about timely train schedules.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, what about what America did to First Nation people?
Yeah. Right.
Fine.
Sure. We did do that. Oh, that's a weekend story as well. The Pope. Well, not for us. It isn't a story. It's Canada that has it as a story. The Pope is in Canada as part of a tour. I don't know whether there's any other countries involved, but he's there to apologize on behalf of the Catholic Church for the traumas inflicted upon the First Nations people, as they refer to them in Canada, by Catholic missionaries, which undoubtedly angered like ultra-conservative Catholics. But I mean, it's a pretty Catholic thing to do. It's a pretty religious thing to do. Always seeking forgiveness. Everybody ought to be. There's always something. Nobody's perfect. It's a basic tenet. Why not show up and apologize for things that don't reflect creditably upon you? It doesn't hurt, and especially if you're a religion and a fairly large-scale organized religion like the Catholic Church, people will still believe in your religion even if you apologize for bad things. It's okay. So.
Right. So certainly
Nicely
the trends
done.
over the last month have been in Democrats' favor as far as the, quote, political environment, quote, goes. The problem,
Yes.
of course,
Okay.
is gerrymandering in the House. Gerrymandering isn't an issue in the Senate, so the Senate's looking stronger
Sort of.
than the House for Democrats. The problem really is that the Republicans only need 4 seats to get control. So it's still a long stretch to keep the House, but not undoable. In fact, Cook Political Report has downgraded Republican expectations from in half. In other words, instead of them thinking they're going to win 30 seats, the environment has changed enough so that they think they'll maybe win 15 seats, maybe more, maybe less. But, trend definitely going in the Democrats' direction. We'll see what happens over time.
Yeah, good.
Of course, they should ask some women. They don't.
Oh, ask them what?
Well, how are
How's
things
it going?
trending, and how do you feel about Republicans these days?
They don't ask them. They must ask some.
Yeah, not enough.
All right. Well,
We'll
they
dismiss
show the
that
numbers,
because we're
right?
going to look at inflation and gas prices and all the traditional markers and historical situations of what happens to the president's team in the midterms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is such an extraordinary situation. A lot of the historical stuff isn't really going to help very much. Yes, it's going uphill, but that doesn't mean the hill can't be climbed. So we'll see what happens, as we say.
Well, I thought they were.
I'm not predicting we're going to win. I'm just saying don't be so quick to predict we'll lose.
Okay. Well, that's something. We could go ahead and, do you want to? It doesn't matter. I understand that if
I don't think we know enough. I think there's a whole lot more that's going to happen.
Well, what are you worried about? Losing your job?
different pandemics.
You just want to be right.
What the Justice Department might do, how that takes effect, what the January 6th committee's report, which hasn't come out yet, and hearings which haven't concluded, will affect things. Whether or not some of the indicted Republican candidates are actually going to wind up going to court over what they've done as they run. Who's going to wind up winning some of these primaries in places like Michigan and Arizona that haven't been settled yet. Yeah, so there's a lot more to figure out before we get that point.
All right.
And plus, it's the summer. Nobody pays attention over the summer. They're too worried about being eaten by sharks.
True.
They have to wait till September.
Yes.
That's the traditional advice anyway.
Okay. Be eaten by a shark?
To wait till September before you start figuring out the political environment. We don't want to release this until September because nobody's paying attention over the summer.
Right. I get you. Well, that's entirely true. Up to and including the shark thing.
Well, so.
All right.
Ixnay on the
what do we do? What?
Rediction spray.
Okay. Sure. Right. Why not? I do offer you the out of it doesn't ever hurt anybody else apparently to be wrong, but that's what makes us different. We'd rather be right, and if we're not sure we're going to be right, just say, I might not know.
Yeah, totally there's all sorts of ways to weasel out about it. People on the other side do this all the time, but
yeah.
You could.
So therefore,
David Brooks should say that the Republicans are going to lose. You see, don't blame me. Tell David Brooks that.
Yeah.
Well, did he actually say that? Well, and now in other news,
I won't read it, but yeah, okay. All right. Well, very good.
David Brooks did say, by the way, these January 6th committee hearings are going to come to nothing.
He did say they'd already blown
lost.
it, right? At some point, or in June, he said the committee's already blown it.
He hasn't written about it, as far as I know. He was on, Friday night PBS News with him and Jonathan Capehart summing up the week. And he said, well, I was wrong about my expectations about the January 6th committee. Okay. Let's just go on to do something else that I'm wrong about.
All right. Right. Yeah, this is my track record. What would you like me to be wrong about tonight? Okay.
Yeah. What do you think I am, Crystal Liza?
All right. Well, it's something that it was acknowledged. That's something, I guess. I don't know how you sum up the activities of the week without discussing the committee's work. But
by the way, there were some really rotten people who were selected to be the candidates in the fall in Maryland.
Yes, right.
And Larry Hogan said, I can't endorse Cox, the gubernatorial candidate. He's awful.
Yeah. He is. Larry
Hogan's fairly popular. And
and
it's a
not
blue
great
state.
guy.
So, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
It will be. And, as a result of how bad Dan Cox and the other guy that you mentioned earlier, who's the AG candidate there, whose name I already have forgotten, but I'm doing better with their names than I am with the Democratic nominees' names, which is unfortunate. And they're likely to be the ones that win.
Nobody focuses until the fall.
Yeah. I guess that's a good excuse for it. Thank you. I'll take it. I'm busy with the summer.
So, Ron Filipowski points out, man of the people, populist Marco Rubio says, unlike Pete Buttigieg, he's focused on real problems and not going to focus on the agenda dictated by a bunch of affluent elitist liberals and a bunch of Marxist misfits. So basically, you had nothing to say. He was complaining about the bill that passed the House and is coming to the Senate about voting on codifying the right for gay marriage. And he said, it's a stupid waste of time, to which Pete Buttigieg said, well, just vote yes and it won't take up any of your time.
That's a good answer. That's right. I mean,
how long does voting yes take?
Yeah, that's pretty good. It doesn't take long. All you have to do is come in and give it the thumbs up. You can turn around and leave. Do whatever you want, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people think Marco Rubio is a stupid waste of time, and we're stuck with him for 6 years. The vote only takes a minute. That's true. Good point. All right. Well done. He's been scoring a lot of points on TV lately.
Right. I mean, Rachel Vindman points out, of course, the use of affluent, elitist, and Marxist in the same sentence about the same person is kind of stupid. They're not interchangeable.
It is to them, I guess. Isn't that interesting? The affluent Marxists among us. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess it can happen, but then you question their Marxism at that point.
Well, the
Never
affluent
question their
Marxists
wealth.
among
We don't
them,
do that here.
among us, are more likely than not to live in the villages in Florida. Thank you.
That's probably true.
And they probably vote for Marco Rubio. So, I don't know that you really want to go there.
I don't know. That's always been their excuse, though, that the elite, and then they just, that's true. They throw anything that's, considered negative. It really doesn't matter. Whatever. Okay. Well, that's par for the course. All right. Well, that's quite a bit as it is. And there's more to come, by the way. Let's see. As a matter of fact, I just make a brief mention of this because it seems like a fun thing. I didn't think we were ever going to hear anything about him again, but Madison Cawthorn has managed to make it back into the news by screwing something else up. He's apparently immediately adopted, he's only been in Congress for the 15 minutes that he got, and he immediately adopted the Rick Santorum lifestyle and has been using his campaign funds to pay for not Arby's but Chick-fil-A lunches to the tunes of several $1,000s worth of Chick-fil-A sandwiches for some reason. And I guess that's really important to him.
They're very expensive where he lives.
Oh, well, that could be true. And maybe he's been using them as poultices on his knuckles after punching trees in the forest. I really don't know what he's up to with all of that, but apparently the newspapers say something. I think the phrase they used was egregiously frequent trips to Chick-fil-A, which I thought was kind of a funny way of putting it.
I'm picturing that old Woody Allen scene in Bananas where he walks into a takeout to fund the army, to feed the army, and he wants 4,000 takeout bags.
Okay, that's a way of doing it, I suppose. An army travels on its stomach, and sometimes it can be in little Chinese food boxes to carry along with them. All right. Well, thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. We will check in with you again on Wednesday, and I guess we can take it from here. I may have to read this Madison Cawthorn story to see exactly how much money he spent. So as we head into the break...
So basically the problem is he took money from a future campaign, but then he lost, and he wasn't supposed to touch that money until he was the actual candidate.
Yes, right. Oh, yes. A lot of the money that he collected was earmarked for his general election campaign, but having lost the primary...
Which didn't happen because he lost the primary, so he's not allowed to touch it, and he spent it anyway.
It's supposed to be returned, actually, to the donors.
Yeah. Or I can get 4,000 Chick-fil-A to go.
That's right. And, I mean, he could make the excuse that I thought that this Chick-fil-A had donated all this money to me, and I was giving them back their money in exchange for,
in-kind sandwiches.
Right. But apparently not. And an anonymous source told on him. How do you like that? So I like that news, and I guess just whatever. He learns his. I was going to say he learns his lesson, but he really doesn't. He just gets booted out and then becomes bitter and thinks that liberals are about to get him.
A poor, broken soul. Alrighty, take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay, very good. All right, well, I will comb through this. We still have a minute or so before our break music comes up, but you can sit back and relax. And I'm going to tell you the Madison Cawthorn story. I have it here from Business Insider. Madison Cawthorn spent campaign donations he was supposed to return on egregiously frequent trips to Chick-fil-A and other businesses, and now can't pay donors back, report says. So that's interesting. I don't know how he's going to make good on these refunds he's supposed to give. Body of the story runs like this. Cawthorn may be in violation of campaign laws as a result of the outrageous spending of campaign funds meant to be used during his now defunct general election campaign, an anonymous source told the Daily Beast. According to the source, the North Carolina Gallup representative's campaign had so little money. How little money? So little money during the end of his primary that they were forced to spend general fund money during the primary. So that's interesting because, of course, he was supposed to be one of those powerhouse fundraisers who was going to kick everybody's butt like Murdery Trader Green and Matt Gaetz, and they just kind of left him in the dust as he just made more and more trouble for himself. So anyway, he ran out of primary campaign money during the primary campaign and decided to borrow against it by using earmarked funds from the general election, and that's a no-no. Election laws do not allow for those funds to be spent until the general election. If a candidate loses their primary, they must return it to donors. Cawthorn lost that primary, of course, against, I guess this is the guy you got to look out for from this district now, Chuck Edwards, whoever that is. Congratulations to him, but I'm sure he's no better. At any rate, the campaign source also told the Daily Beast that Cawthorn's campaign spent egregiously, referring to $1,500 spent at Chick-fil-A, $21,000 spent for lodging in Florida, which is not where he's from, and nearly $3,000 at a place listed as Papa's Beer. I think they might sell Papas there, which is a bad thing. That's human trafficking, and you shouldn't allow it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, let's see. Look at this. I had a note here from Greg. If I had known this, I would have asked for him to do this. He was just sending a note as we ended this segment a little bit just before the break and just said, all right, well, I'll sign. He was going to say, I'm going to sign off at the break, but the typo came out, we'll sing off at the break. And I wish I had heard that because I would rather have heard him sing himself off than wait for the break, but okay. No pressure. Let's see. Is there anything else? I guess we'll just go over the rest of the numbers. There's just a paragraph or two left in this relatively short story about Madison Cawthorn. And it might be the last we ever hear of Madison Cawthorn, so we might as well enjoy it. Right. So he spent $1,500 at Chick-fil-A. My goodness. $21,000 for lodging in Florida. $3,000 at a place listed as Papa's Beer. We'd love to find out a little more about Papa's Beer. The state of Cawthorn's campaign spending is not known to the public because the campaign is late on its last FEC filing, the source told the Daily Beast. According to the FEC, the deadline to file the latest quarterly report is July 15th. So he should be in trouble for that too, but they never punish anyone for that. According to Cawthorn's latest filing, which covers his campaign from January 1st through April 27th, the campaign was already operating at a deficit with $324,566, $325,000 basically, in debts owed compared to $137,598 of cash on hand. FEC data shows that by the end of April, Cawthorn spent $3.3 million, which was nearly all of the campaign's funds raised since January 2021. He's a smart guy and a fiscal conservative, you see. There was just no money, the campaign source said. It was dollar in, dollar out. It was actually dollar in, $2 out, as it turns out. So if he loses, it's a really bad thing. And he did lose. And the only way to cover it is getting money straight from the candidate or the treasurer. That is the treasurer of the campaign, I guess, but they don't have that anymore, so I guess it comes from him. And didn't he get a bunch of money in his car crash settlement not that many years ago? Maybe he could just empty out that. But I guess he's on the hook for it. I mean, he'll just continue to plead poverty somehow, and I doubt they'll ever get this money out of him. But I would love to see somebody really put the hammer down, bring the hammer down on him, and why not? I mean, you can't just grift forever, usually, although I'm sure he thought Donald Trump did. I should be able to, too. I mean, I espouse the same stupid nonsense. Why can't I have the same lifestyle? No, it doesn't really work like that. Experts told the Daily Beast that Cawthorn can also pay his donors back by fundraising if he wanted to do that. I mean, like, you no longer have the leverage to do that because you're not influential. But he could go on a MAGA tour, and maybe people would just throw him some pity money. And there's enough lunatics out there that it might just, reach a critical mass. He should try it, I guess. He can also, of course, use his own money, or he can start another campaign, which the anonymous source said he is unwilling to do, and that's good news. A spokesperson for Cawthorn did not immediately respond to insiders' request for comment, and that's the end of the story, because there was no more comment. So they ran out of stuff to say. Story ended. Terrific. Okay, let's see. Other things I wanted to share with you. Trying to decide, again, the direction of which to go. The current hot stories or the weird esoteric thing that can certainly be used to illustrate a political point. I don't know. All right, let's see. You know what? This seems fairly important. Let me bring this to your attention. Reuters reporting this over the weekend, and it sat open. The tab was open all weekend, and I didn't get to read the story. So let's do it now. I'll take care of my own business now. This, a piece from the end of last week by Jacqueline Thompson. At Reuters, ex-Trump Attorney General Barr. You remember that guy? He was sort of almost kind of rehabilitating his image by coming out and saying, yeah, actually Trump was kind of nuts and crazy at the end there, and I disagreed with him, and I knew the election was over, but he wouldn't listen to me, that sort of thing. Well, I don't know. Don't believe it, I guess. Good warning, again, we're constantly warning ourselves about Lynn Cheney. You might as well, Lynn Cheney too. Liz Cheney, the one we're actually talking about. Lynn Cheney, warn yourself all you want. Won't do any good. But at any rate, ex-Trump AG Barr and others launch a Republican-backed election law group. I mean, the whole thing about, it was all nonsense, Trump was crazy, etc., etc. Now he's launching a group that actually would accept the money on offer to fight the legal battles over the thing that didn't happen that he said wasn't true. That seems very odd, don't you think? But then you're like, oh yeah, it says right up at the top, it's a Republican-backed election law group. So no, that doesn't seem odd at all for them. Prominent Republicans, including former U.S. Attorney General William Barr, who was a straight shooter. Remember that. Remember, we were told by good Democratic sources, it's going to be okay, he's a straight shooter. And he wasn't for a very long time. And then at the end, he was like, we're busted. I will pretend to be a straight shooter again. And now he's back out there raising money to be a non-straight shooter, a crooked shooter once again, now that he's off the hook. Prominent Republicans, including Barr, on Thursday launched a new legal group they say is aimed at defending state legislatures' right to set election laws. What's he doing? He's raising money to pay himself a salary to go around the country doing things. For what purpose? To support the independent state legislature theory, which is not a thing, and they are going to use, egregiously, let's say, to use the same word as was in the Madison Cawthorn story, as continuity. There's egregiousness happening everywhere. And basically advanced the crazy stuff that he dismissed to the January 6th committee when it looked like it would land him in trouble. But now that I guess he thinks he's cleared himself from that, he's going to go out and grift off of this. Terrific. The nonprofit group which will be called Restoring Integrity and Trust in Elections, RITE, in case you were wondering about that, is also co-founded by long-term Republican strategist, who do you hate? Who's due for another round of hatred? Karl Rove. Yes, that's right. Karl Rove and William Barr teaming up for this one. And by the way, I guess we'll get to this later. It's later in this paragraph. I just happened to see it up in the bullet point up top. You want to hate some more people? Karl Rove, Bill Barr, hotel magnate and GOP donor Steve Wynn. Wasn't he like in serious sexual harassment trouble and something about the way he raised money and was national finance co-chair along with Elliot Roidy, who also was a perv? And who was the third person who was so terrible and also a perv in all of this? I can't remember who was national. I'll have to think about that for a second. Maybe one of you will think of it and you can tweet it with the KITM hashtag and remind me who I'm thinking of. Anyway, how do you like that collection of idiots? There's more, by the way. There's also attorney Bobby Birchfield, who I can't recall anything about, but it says here last year he resigned from the law firm King and Spalding. He did? Oh my God. It means nothing to me, but it meant something to Reuters. Maybe they will explain what it is. Birchfield told Reuters Thursday that the group was created in response to expanding court fights over election laws. That is to say, it was created in response to the realization that people wanted to donate money to this cause and that they could take that money because they're lawyers. It has already filed 2 briefs in election law cases backing state legislatures' ability to change voting rules. We do not think the courts should be setting the rules for elections. We believe that's the province of state legislatures, Birchfield said. He said the nonprofit is not a foil to Democratic lawyers like Mark Elias, who left law firm Perkins Coie last year to start his own practice, regularly litigating over election laws. No. It's something completely different. This group is not affiliated with former President Donald Trump and does not support particular candidates, Birchfield said. He said the group's members reject claims made by some other conservatives that the 2020 election is illegitimate due to mass voter fraud. Elias on Thursday told Reuters he believes the new organization is, quote, fundamentally about making voting harder and opposing voting rights. He said that the state laws the group defends are falsely premised on the idea that fraud is rampant in U.S. elections. And that is true. That's a good point. Well taken. They will say, well, we're just about defending the rights of state legislatures to make new rules if they want to. They only want to, of course, because they want to make it more difficult for people that they think are too likely to vote Democratic to actually cast any ballots. The motivation, the reasoning they will give for the necessity of these new laws is non-existent fraud. Well, we don't believe in the fraud. We're just saying that they have the right to pass these bills, even if they want to pass them on totally bogus premise. That's okay with us. We don't care. They still have the right to cast their votes in the legislature and pass new laws. The fact that they're doing so on the basis of a lie, well, that's their problem, not ours. One of the group's briefs filed in June before the Montana Supreme Court, that is, before the Montana Supreme Court could escape, I guess, supports reinstating several new voting laws blocked by a judge in March, including ones eliminating same-day voter registration and heightening voter identification requirements in the state. The court in May suspended that ruling, but has not issued a final decision. Represented by lawyers from Jones Day, the group also filed a brief Tuesday at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, supporting a Republican-backed Florida law that restricts the use of drop boxes and third-party organizations' ability to collect voter registration forms. The court in May temporarily reinstated those measures after a lower court judge said they were racially discriminatory. Wynn is the group's finance chair, which is great because he's a pervert and it taints any group he raises money for. It will also help others with similar agenda through through financial aid or intellectual capital by connecting them to lawyers, Birchfield said. So it's a referral service. That's now intellectual capital. You like that? Birchfield last year represented the Republican National Committee and Trump's re-election campaign in a pre-election legal challenge to North Carolina, extending the deadline for receiving mail-in ballots in the 2020 race. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected that case. He was previously an outside ethics advisor, which is ridiculous, but even worse, ethics advisor to the Trump organization. So the guy has never worked a day in his life, essentially. But said Thursday he no longer holds that role because there never was one, I would add to that. Okay, and that's the end of that article. But keep an eye on Bill Barr, looking to grift off of the independent state legislature theory, whatever you would call it, bonanza, I suppose, and not exactly covering himself in glory. Again, I can't believe it. All right, let's see. Other things to add to the mix here. I have an MSNBC entry from Steve Bannon at the Maddow blog, which I thought might make some interesting reading given our discussion at the end of last week, I think in our special Friday show, when Greg and I were talking about the weirdness of learning how much discussion went on between Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, and Mike Pence on January 6th. That Mike Pence stepped into the role of acting commander-in-chief because the supposed commander-in-chief wouldn't do anything, wouldn't get off the couch, and wouldn't stop watching TV. So Mike Pence stepped into the role, and it's not entirely clear that should have been allowed to happen or what exactly. I don't know, but it did have the effect, and it may have been Milley's desire to have this effect, to make it look like Mike Pence was decisive and leaderly. Is leaderly a word? Leader-like, stepping into a leadership role in the absence of the actual, supposed commander-in-chief. Anyway, it's worth some more thought. So I thought perhaps maybe there was some in this article. We'll find out why the Joint Chiefs chair talked to Pence, not Trump, on January 6th. And I mean, the immediate reason, I hope to learn more than this, the immediate reason is Trump wouldn't pick up the phone and talk to him, even if he called. And even if he showed up at the White House, he probably wouldn't have wanted to talk to him. He would have isolated himself. There's a military chain of command, and Mike Pence wasn't supposed to be part of it. He took on a leadership role because Donald Trump created a vacuum. Well, that's the most natural conclusion here. I'd like to read about that. But it's worth reminding everybody that although the vice president is the vice president, he does what he does, she does what she does, that's the role. There's nothing in it. He or she, the vice president, is not a second in command per se. He's just a backup. President of the Senate, that's sometimes important, but it's as people have said, who was it? Was it Nance Garner? Is that the name that I have? Do I have that correctly? Who had said something about the vice presidency not being worth a bucket of warm spit? Delicious thought. Really, right now, not feeling all that well now that I've said that. But at any rate, what they mean, of course, is he's not like the second in command of the U.S. Armed Forces or anything. He's got no place in the chain of command unless the president is incapacitated or removed from office or whatever for some reason. They treat him with a certain amount of respect, but he's not the vice commander-in-chief. So that's an important thing to note at the outset. So here's how Steve Bannon writes it up. In early June, in one of the first public hearings of the January 6th committee, Vice Chair Liz Cheney noted that it was then Vice President Mike Pence who called for the military to defend the Capitol when it was under attack. Trump gave no order to deploy the National Guard that day and made no effort to work with the Department of Justice to coordinate and deploy law enforcement assets, the Wyoming Congresswoman said in early June. But Mike Pence did each of those things. This received some fresh attention as part of last night's, that would have been Thursday night's, hearings. NBC News reported And a quote here, General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, didn't hear from Trump about the riot. He spoke instead to Pence. The panel played audio from its interview with Milley, who said of Trump, you know, you're the commander-in-chief. You got an assault going on at the Capitol of the United States of America, and there's nothing, no call, nothing, zero. Or as I had put it months earlier, I believe, Santiago was leaving for the rest of his life, and he hadn't packed a thing. He called no one and hadn't packed a thing, right? I know, just using the quotes from the movies doesn't explain everything, but, you know, I've been on the inaction thing for quite some time. Everybody, you know, January 7th, you realized that there was no action from Trump. So it's not something special or anything, but it's interesting to hear it coming from Mark Milley, especially in setting up his communications with the VP instead. As part of the same testimony, the general said he had multiple conversations with the then vice president. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders, Milley said, referring to Pence. The general added that Pence was very firm in telling then Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, get the military down here, get the guard down here, put down this situation. Which they did not do until very, very late in the day. So, I mean, he was very decisive. It just didn't do anything for several hours, several critical hours. Part of what made this extraordinary was the degree to which it casts Trump in an indefensible light. Thus, the New York Post headline from over the weekend, right? The then president could have called the Joint Chiefs Chairman and Defense Secretary, but he made a conscious decision not to. The Republicans' dereliction of duty couldn't be more obvious. But there's another part of this that's worth dwelling on. There's a chain of command, and Pence wasn't supposed to be a part of it. He took on a leadership role anyway, basically because Trump created a vacuum by picking up his television remote instead of picking up his phone. Under normal circumstances, the Joint Chiefs Chairman and the Defense Secretary wouldn't consider taking orders from a sitting vice president. But everyone involved in the governing process seemed to come to an implicit understanding as the Trump era neared its end. The office of the presidency was, for all intents and purposes, empty. This is very interesting. By the way, just I'm going to have to do an aside here before I forget, although I can feel it slipping away already. About him not being a part of the chain of command, but stepping in and doing it anyway. The irony of this is, right, why is he in this situation? Or why would Donald Trump say that Mike Pence was in the situation where he's trapped in the Capitol and everybody's calling for his head and an angry mob is looking to get him and execute him? Why? Because he wouldn't do the thing that Trump asked. Why wouldn't he do the thing that Trump asked? Because he correctly concluded, after consulting with his counsel and staff, he didn't have the legal authority to do it. Right. The thing that Trump wanted, that is to reverse, unilaterally decide that certain electors wouldn't be counted or to send them back to the states or anything like that. The authority for the vice president to do this did not exist. So now the crowd is out there saying, it does exist. You should be using it. We're very angry at you and we're going to catch you and hang you because you wouldn't use this authority, which you think doesn't exist. And now, to save yourself, you need to raise the armed forces. Which authority for you does not exist? And yet, he was willing to pick up the phone in an attempt to exercise that authority, which does not exist. I guess you could argue, well, he was doing it for the sake of the United States of America, to save our system of government and our Constitution. Another way of looking at it, of course, is to save his own skin, and that would have been a nice coincidental benefit, I think. I think it would be a little unfair to, even for Mike Pence, who is a jerk and a half, and we really don't want to help him. But it still might be, if not unfair to Mike Pence, difficult to convince a whole lot of people that it is absolutely positively the case and no other explanation exists that he was doing it only out of self-interest. But it is ironic that, Trump said, I need you to steal the election for me in the joint session. And he said, no way, I'm not going to do that. The Constitution gives me no such authority. And then the mob comes to hang him and he says, I should call General Milley and get him to get the military in here. And surely someone on his staff, well, maybe not, at some point might have said to him, I would make that call because it might work, because they might be willing to help you, because the Capitol and our system of government is also at stake. But I do want to point out, you don't have the legal or constitutional authority to order the military to do this. And he still said, well, to hell with that. I'm going to do it anyway because some reasons. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. I thought it was worth pointing out that he didn't have the authority for either of these things. And one has made him, I guess both have apparently made him some sort of, if not a hero, he's getting a lot of praise from people who don't normally praise him for keeping his head and valuing our constitutional system of government, except for the part where he makes himself commander-in-chief, which he isn't. I don't know. That's just, it's odd, and I want to note that. Like, for 20 minutes, I want to note that over and over again. So where were we with this? Yes, okay. So, under normal circumstances, the Joint Chiefs Chair and Defense Secretary wouldn't take orders from a sitting vice president, but everybody was acknowledging there's no commander-in-chief here. We have to take our orders from somewhere. Do you? I guess so. Why not? Yes, there was a person behind the desk in the Oval Office, Steve Bannon continues, but since he lacked the will, the wherewithal, and the interest to do the job, and always had, folks like Pence started giving orders, folks who were personally imperiled started giving orders, and the rules that are supposed to dictate our system of government were simply overlooked for a little while. Which, after all, I mean, Trump must be furious because he's saying, all I was ever asking you to do was overlook them for a little while because our country was in danger, because there were these extraordinary circumstances, and it all comes down to, Mike Pence is a very flexible guy on the Constitution, it turns out. All it takes to get him to ignore it is to convince him that actually this would be for the best in the best interest of the country. And remember, Trump and Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman and all the other, what's his name, Ken Cheeseborough, and I can't remember the name of the guy we discovered last week we read about in the article, the people who discovered about him too, pushing the same thing. All they were ever saying was, if we could only get you around to agree that this maneuver in the joint session is for the best on the whole for the country, then you would be willing to just bend the rules a little bit like you're going to do later today anyway. They would have had him on that one, logically speaking. So there you go. The rules that were supposed to dictate our system of government were simply overlooked for a little while. As conservative commentator Noah Rothman summarized, Trump, quote, abdicated his duties as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and that power was usurped out of necessity, though, by the vice president. But it was usurped. That's true. This isn't intended as criticism of Pence. It should be. At least not entirely. Someone needed to give orders, so he did, and by all appearances, the then vice president's directives were sound and responsible. But this appears to have been a rare instance in which there was a breakdown in our constitutional order because at a moment of crisis, Trump didn't want to exercise his duties and showed no interest in protecting his country. In January 2018, as one of Trump's government shutdowns got underway, presidential historian John Meacham said of the developments, "This is what government would look like without a president." More than 4 years later, it's a quote that continues to resonate for a reason. Well, that's interesting. It's a terrific constitutional law, hypothetical, and an interesting exercise to think about, and unresolved, and we'll never get to the bottom of it, and no one would be willing. It's interesting how all of a sudden no one would be willing to tell Mike Pence, you don't have that authority. Well, it seems necessary. Yeah. But again, that's one of those perception games that at the very edge of constitutional law, in these gray areas, interpretation matters, and I guess outcome matters a lot. I mean, this is like we were saying last week. when you're at the level where you're saying, well, we're just going to bend the rules a little bit because we think it's for the best in the country. Yes, we don't have the constitutional authority to do this, but we're going to do it anyway because America needs Trump in office, right? And to need him to continue in office. And basically you've set up a question of, if we're right, then we'll write the history and Trump will be the hero that saved America. If we're wrong, and here's where the stakes were imbalanced. If we're wrong, meh. So we just write the regular history and just go on from there. No, it can't really be like that. You need to stake something a little bigger than that if that's what you're betting. And the problem is, if you're wrong, then what you were doing was treason. And I know everybody is saying, no, it's specifically defined in the Constitution. Well, there has to be some, at the minimum, it's certainly insurrection. There really need to be some serious charges. It can't be, well, we can sweep away the constitutional order, and if we're right, we rewrite history forever and rearrange our system of government. And if we're wrong, I don't know, I'm out $5. That's not a bet you can make. That doesn't cover it.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Many other things to bring up and to get to, and not sure exactly which direction to go in with it, but I'll at least take a moment to tell you what Ricky, our Kanuckistani friend, had to say from up in Canada, having heard the name of the country called a couple of times during our discussions with Greg. She first jumps in to say that she also, I guess, referring to Greg's point about younger voters, younger conservative voters, younger voters in general, being less reliable as voters in terms of turnout. Pointing out, she says, I also think that more young people need to run for office, not just vote, but that by doing so, that's part of the reason that young people don't vote. They don't feel that they are represented by those who do run, and that's almost certainly true, but that's one of the issues with it. I mean, that's the younger voters are the lower limit of when you can vote, and there's age limitations on running for office, at least for federal office. They're not very high. I mean, 25 and 30 years old are still relatively young, I think, but you can't run when you're 18. So for the first 18, 19, 20, and then 5 more years. For the first 8 years that you're allowed to vote, you're not permitted to run for federal office. You could be running for state and local office, and many people do, and that's great. But on the other hand, the lower the office, the less attention the youngest voters tend to pay to those campaigns. So those offices for which 18-year-olds and up are eligible to run are very often just don't get any attention from the youngest voters. School board, etc. You see those races every once in a while in the newspapers featured an 18-year-old running for school board, which makes a lot of sense because they've just been through school. Occasionally town council, sometimes even state representatives. I don't know whether some states have age limits on that too, but at any rate, I think it's sort of it's a vicious cycle of, I suppose, the less likely to pay attention to the lower races, and yet those are the places where their peers are most likely to be running because it's permissible, but still they're vastly outnumbered. And almost never the case. And of course, a politician, if you're successful and you win and you stay in office, even if you win as a young person and continue to win because you're a fantastic politician and everyone loves you, one of the things about time is that eventually you just get to be an old politician. And even if you're not an old person, if you've been around for a while, you're not that fresh, there's only a very limited window in which you're young and new. That's true. Anyway, so that's an interesting point, though. But yeah, it would be better, I think, if a younger cohort were also running, although it's not the cure-all, and she doesn't say that it is, but I just point out, by way of being devil's advocate, Madison Cawthorn is young, and he's terrible, and he's out. Matt Gaetz is relatively young, and he's terrible. And he was running, by the way, as a state representative for years when he was a real youngster, and he was even worse there. So, okay, yeah, being young doesn't make you good. That's not the point. And that wasn't her point either, I don't think. Anyway, other comments. Greg had said in passing about the trucker convoy protest in Canada, had made some mention about the ideas of the truckers in that convoy having been paid by right-wing operatives. And, that struck me at the same time. I think Ricky is saying, I don't think anybody paid the truckers to go to Ottawa. I don't even think many of them were actually truckers. That is also possibly true. But it was less a part of their seemingly more organic, because perhaps it was, maybe it wasn't any more organic. It was just the original sort of thing, and it made it seem therefore more valid. And the copycat nonsense that went on here in the United States, I think, was more about people getting paid, and not entirely, because they didn't get paid very well or very regularly, and that was part of the reason it fell apart. But it did seem like the people participating in the whatever the hell you would call it, in the protest, and including those who were truckers, did seem to have come to Ottawa sort of on their own volition. Whether they also raised money along the way and distributed it among themselves is not the same thing. It's not what's insinuated when people are saying they got paid to do this thing. So that's a possibility too. Lastly, here I think we got our wires crossed. She was saying, look, the Catholic Church, about the Pope's visit there. The Catholic Church committed genocide against Indigenous peoples in Canada. They removed children from their homes, put them in schools, and punished them for speaking their own language. Don't downplay it because it's, quote, what the Catholic Church does. Okay, that's easy. For me, I don't have to worry about that one, I don't think. I think to the extent that I was saying anything about something being what the Catholic Church does, what I meant was that the people ought not to feel embarrassment about it. Sometimes this is the sort of thing that ultra-conservative Catholics will say. We don't want an apology tour. We don't want the church apologizing for things. The church is either infallible, or at least popes are, and depending on how you view this thing, we don't need to be apologizing for anything. And I was just saying, well, that's what religions do. Not the Catholic Church alone, but among many religions. Atonement and making amends for things and trying to live a better life is ultimately or to be better people is ultimately what most, anyway, the ones I understand most intimately, I suppose, Western religions are supposed to be about at bottom, and so it ought not to be embarrassing or inconsistent with the practice of certainly any of the Western religions as I understand them. Well, I can't even say Western because, of course, Native American religion would be Western as well. But what we're talking about when we say Western, because we're chauvinistic about it and just as bad as the Proud Boys, I guess, if you assume these things this way, but Western European, Abrahamic religions, which aren't even European. Okay. Anyway, lots of mix-ups about that. But anyway, all I was saying was that they ought not to be concerned that it was somehow inconsistent with their practice of religion, because it was very much a part of their religion to make these sorts of apologies. And it would take, yes, the fact that it took hundreds of years is sad, and I guess you could say disgraceful in terms, if you look at it in terms of the span of the human lifetime. But the Catholic Church isn't a human. It's a very old and staid institution, and these things change slowly. And on institutional time, it's going to take hundreds of years to come around to this. So yeah, it's good that they were doing it. Abusing, it was never intended and never said that that abusing native populations is what the Catholic Church does, though it is what they do. That's not what we were talking about. What churches do, and what I was talking about there, was churches ought to be in the business of apologizing and making amends for wrongs that were done in the past, even if it wasn't done by you personally. And that's not inconsistent with continued faith in the religion. And true, it's not the first apology made by the Pope, and it is something that was demanded by indigenous leaders that he come and apologize on Canadian soil. True, but I don't think that makes much less of the fact that he said, okay, I will. I mean, I don't think you want to get into that game. We demand that you come to Canadian soil and apologize. All right, I will. Well, that's not good because we demanded it and you said yes. That can't be the approach to things. I think he deserves acknowledgement for having come to do it, and the people who demanded it deserve acknowledgement for having made it happen. Seems simple enough to me. I don't think it's inconsistent in either way, so I'm glad that he did it. There's probably popes before him who wouldn't. I know there are lots of them. There are some that might have made the journey but didn't get around to it, or perhaps they thought the time hadn't arrived for it and they had pushed as hard as they... Popes are pretty political as well as everything else. I mean, I don't know whether we imagine that they shouldn't be or have the illusion that they aren't, but they come to their position politically and they have a constituency to satisfy, and you can be undone as a pope along with every other elective office, and that's what it is. It's an elective office. So, they have their own problems. I'm glad that this one had it in him, and that the circumstances were right in his view to accept the invitation/demand that he come to Canada and do this. So, all right, I have no vested interest in defending the Pope. I'm not Catholic. But from an outsider's perspective, I thought it made good sense to mention as news from the weekend. Not everybody agrees. Okay. Well, at any rate, there are other things to discuss, and they're out there, and I don't know, let's see, how many more of them ought to be derived from the January 6th committee? Well, I think we can spread that out over the next couple of days, weeks, months, while we wait for the next set of hearings to come. All right, let's see. Let's try this. This seems like an interesting direction to go in. There was plenty of gun-related stories over the weekend as well. And we spent some time on it on Friday, and I guess it's still on my mind. And more things have happened, and I've got to, I guess we've got to address some of them. Let's see. When Greg was on the subject of Texas having a rough week, and Greg Abbott kind of losing a couple of points and having things collapse on him down in Texas, all because of his own doing, of course, and his own policies, his own approach to politics. One thing came to mind. I had mentioned it on the air before, spent some considerable time on it. The Harris County, Texas, and there were multiple happenings in Harris County, but this time a grand jury there that had declined to indict a guy who had shot and killed a 9-year-old girl because he said he had done it accidentally. He claimed to have been robbed at an ATM and have fired his gun at the robber, who was then fleeing, but then apparently I don't know the exact details of everything, but he must have lost track of him at some point because he was pretty sure he saw him get into a pickup truck. They describe it as a truck, but, I don't think it was a bread delivery truck. But a pickup truck probably, because it's Texas, and trying to drive away from the scene. And at some point he must lose track of them, because later on he sees what I guess is a similar truck, but sometimes in these situations it might have nothing whatsoever. It is a pickup truck. It might have been the same color. It might not have been the same color. Same size, same make, same model. Might not have been. We don't really know. But anyway, he fires at this truck. He claims thinking this was the truck that he was pretty sure he saw the guy get into. What it's doing driving by him again, I have no idea. But, he might have thought the guy is coming to finish me off. So he fires his own gun at the truck, not knowing who's in it. Cardinal sin with gun usage. You're supposed to absolutely have no doubt whatsoever in your mind about the target, what you're shooting at, and where they are. And what's behind it, by the way. But anyway, he shoots anyhow, and it happens to not have anything whatsoever to do with the robber or the robbery. It's just a family on their way to a pizza dinner somewhere, and he kills their 9-year-old daughter. And the grand jury in Harris County, Texas said, well, it's a tragic mistake, but only a mistake. And gosh, he has a right to self-defense, and he thought that that's what he was exercising, except really all the elements of it fall apart. The truck was no threat to him. There was no indication that anyone inside was a threat. He was just mistaken about it. And after all, he was shooting after somebody who was fleeing. And back in the good old days that Donald Trump really wants us to return to, that was not an excuse to shoot at somebody. And yet here we are. But I also happened to note over the weekend, reading more about, now that details are emerging of the report of the Texas state legislature on the Uvalde school shooting. Somebody asked me over the weekend, but whatever happened to that one cop who said that he has spotted the shooter on his way into the building with a rifle and had a shot at him but didn't take it. What was the outcome with it? What happened with that? And all I can find is that apparently he had the guy in his sights and he radioed in and said, I need permission here. What can I do? Should I shoot at this guy? And I gather there was some question about, do we know enough about what his motive is? Because remember that we also just recently heard that, and I think this also in Harris County, Texas, but I'm not positive it was Harris County, the story of the cops being proud of themselves there for stopping a mass shooting, arresting a guy with a assault rifle and a bunch of magazines and and a pistol and everything else, taking up a position like overlooking a dance competition for teenage girls at a local mall. And they spot the guy and they intercede and they take him away, and we stop the mass shooting. But then when it comes to time to charge him in court, they're like, we don't really actually have anything to charge him with here, because here in Texas you can walk around with an AR-15 if you want. You can have it in your hand if you want. You can have lots of magazines full of ammunition if you want. It's just you're not allowed to murder people in the street, and we didn't wait for you to murder anybody, so now we can only charge you with a misdemeanor, which seems, kind of like an incomplete picture here. And I'm just thinking about that. And the other guy who, like I said, for all intents and purposes, to the family who were the victims, where the 9-year-old was murdered, really, by this lunatic who thought no laws or anything applied to him whatsoever. And apparently they don't. Apparently he read the law correctly there in Texas. From their perspective, they were just driving down the street. This is just a mass shooting in progress. A guy who at random has stepped into the street to fire on passing cars. That's a mass shooting in progress from their perspective. But no, as it turns out, he really thought he was doing the right thing. So as it turns out, down in Texas, next time a mass shooter is caught alive, the mass shooter should attempt to say, hey, by the way, I thought that all these kids had just recently robbed me at the ATM, but I was mistaken, and see if that works. I don't know. I think that's really pushing it, But that's the next logical step. Of course, other people were also pointing out they probably wouldn't even take this logical step again if the circumstances were different. If Greg Abbott had been in the truck passing by at random and this guy had mistaken it for the robber and had fired into it and killed Greg Abbott, you could be pretty sure he would be charged. You would not be able to get away with the excuse that, well, I thought that was the robber. Yeah, well, it turned out to be the governor. Yeah, well, this turned out to be a 9-year-old girl. She's pretty important too. Not really. Not really. 9-year-old Hispanic girl, sorry, not very interesting. Killed the governor? We don't believe that you thought that was really the robber. And I mean, in reality, of course, what would Greg Abbott be doing driving by in a pickup truck? And maybe that's it, right? If you had seen, if I thought the robber got into an armored limousine with the flag of the state of Texas at the front, and who knows, maybe down there they have big longhorn steer horns on the hood like they did in the movies way back when. But at any rate, I guess at that point you would say, now, you couldn't possibly have thought that the robber was in that car, could you? But still, I have a feeling that if certain other people had been accidentally killed in that situation, there would have been charges. And it's really kind of wrong to say that, well, this type of person leads to no charges being filed. Don't you think? I thought that was a little bit odd. Anyway, we have that to reconcile. I brought up the Uvalde shooting because when I read a little bit about it, apparently the police officer who was looking for permission to fire on this, the shooter on their way, in his way into the school building, he was asking permission because he was worried about a couple of things. First of all, and it's a good call, quite honestly. I think I'd rather have the cops check for permission in general, though one might wish for a magical bullet to take out this shooter and bring everybody back to life. He was worried about he said, about possibly hitting kids, although I don't know what the angle was here. I don't think the kids were out for recess, but maybe, whatever. Or he was heading toward the building. What if I miss and the bullet goes through the window? All very understandable. But he was also saying, I need permission. I'm not certain whether I'm allowed to engage this person. And somebody on Twitter speculated, maybe it's that, the law in the state of Texas is right now, that's just a guy with a assault rifle exercising his Second Amendment rights. He's perfectly within his rights to carry an AR-15 openly. It's weird that he's driving erratically and smashing into a ditch outside of a school, hopping a fence and heading toward a school building. But, all these things are by themselves not crimes, and I don't know what to do. But what I thought was really interesting was he was worried about his liability either for mistakenly, accidentally shooting a kid in the background or shooting somebody who was simply exercising their Second Amendment rights. And this is happening at the same time that we're saying, yeah, this guy over here, though, thought he was shooting at a robber but really wasn't and killed a 9-year-old girl, and there's no charges. Now, cops, on top of everything else, have, of course, the qualified immunity on their side. And between the fact that the Texas grand juries won't indict you for shooting at what you think is a robber but is really a 9-year-old girl, and qualified immunity, you start to wonder why that shot didn't get taken. Even though, on the whole, it's probably best that people not take shots that they're not sure about. So, that's a thing to think about. All right. Speaking of guns, I wanted to bring another thing to your attention, which I thought was really pretty interesting, and I'll have to share the video. There's no audio here that I can even share, but I thought this was really something, as I said, a bit of grim genius that I saw circulated over the weekend, and basically a guerrilla art installation, I suppose is what you might call it. I saw a couple people tweeting around saying it was brilliant urban art, but I don't know exactly I guess it was in an urban setting. I don't know whether urban is what I would have used for this. But anyway, what they've done here is, well, I'll let you, well, I can't not say anything about the video. What they've done here is in a, I don't know, a coffee shop or something that also happens to have a rack of greeting cards for sale. And I don't know whether that's something that it already had or frequently had, or that was the only place that they could find to install it because they wouldn't let them do it at a Hallmark store because they were afraid or whatever. But they set up what looks like card racks, same thing all over the place. Congratulations, birthday, grandparents' day, whatever else you would see, and then a sympathy card section, and there are always sympathy card sections. This sympathy card section, though, was filled with black cards with stark white type that, let's say, things like, well, sympathy, 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 arms, 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 gunned, 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 I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, shooting, shooting, shooting. Each one of them have their own themes. It is a school shooting section in between friendship and thank you, in which they've inserted a whole rack of cards that basically say sympathy for your kid being killed at school. I'm sorry your teacher was murdered at school. All of these, like, oh my God, and it was set up, and the cameras are filming people's reactions to it, and you can't tell. That's one of the interesting things, the reactions. These are the reactions of people who can't quite tell whether they're being shown something real or not. It is there. Is this an urban art, guerrilla art installation, or is there really the need? Have we really gotten to the point in this society where you can get away with sympathy cards specifically geared to school shootings? Because, gosh, it seems like there's enough of them that there's a real market for this thing. But isn't it in poor taste? Well, of course, yes. And yet here we are. And, I mean, it's a real thing. It's really happening. And is it really any different than the thoughts and prayers that get offered all the time? You say, now, come on. That's really just reducing it to the most ridiculous level. Sympathy cards specifically for this, it's in terrible taste. These things... Then you realize that you were saying, well, aren't these things better left unmentioned? And of course they are not. But what is the difference between a totally tasteless section of such cards and simply offering rote thoughts and prayers at the time? If they're expressed verbally, they're okay. But if they're expressed in written form, they're not. That doesn't seem to make any sense. Is it the fact that they're for sale? I don't know. I'm not certain what it is that it captures, but it captures something. And like I said, it's to me grim genius to put that out there, to make people stop and think. Too many of these things, enough that I actually wondered whether there might really be a section of Hallmark cards on school shootings. And by the way, what message could you possibly put on such a thing? I mean, it really is a genre unto itself. And you can't address it without addressing it in exactly this way. And they're not saying anything inherently offensive. It's all the same. Because thoughts and prayers is essentially just saying, well, I'm sorry to hear that your children were murdered. I'm sorry to hear, you, student, that your teacher was murdered. Gosh, isn't it terrible that everyone in the neighborhood was gunned down by somebody? Yeah, it is. It's a really fantastic thing. You should see it. I'll include it in the roundup. There's no way to describe it. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I can't play audio. That makes no sense. But it looks like it comes from a TikTok user by, I got to get in close here to make sure I get the name here, Change the Ref. And I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean, but credit to this person for bringing it to the attention of those of us here on Twitter, even if it's not the original creator of the content. I don't know what the rules are on TikTok, but that's what it's labeled. And you ought to see it, and I'm sure that whoever did it will be out there claiming credit for it fairly soon. And credit is, in fact, due for that. I had another gun-related story to bring to your attention, but I am, we're out of time on this one. And I don't know whether I'm going to get back to it or not, but if you didn't see it, I retweeted it during the weekend. A story that seems to have it all in terms of the inherent contradictions of gun ownership and reliance on guns for personal and familial safety. A story out of Kentucky of a sort of a doomsday prepper who built himself a home with panic rooms and a gigantic, well-stocked panic bunker underneath the ground and guns in every room. And the big irony of it turns out to be that, somebody found out about all of this. And, one of the inherent inconsistencies of doomsday prepping is, of course, you're prepping against roving bands of marauders who in a lawless society will simply come and take all of what is yours. Unless, of course, you secure it with A, guns, and B, an impenetrable bunker. But what happens when somebody who's just as paranoid as you finds out that you've got a head start on them and have built a bunker to shut them out in the case of an apocalypse? Well, in all likelihood, if they believe an apocalypse is imminent, and it's hard to avoid that if you're moving in certain circles in this country, they may decide, what if I show up before the apocalypse and kill everybody in the house and take the bunker for myself? Well, the police, if the apocalypse doesn't arrive immediately afterwards, the cops will come and they will arrest you and you'll be in real big trouble. Unless, of course, they can't get in there because you've got a bunker and a bunch of AR-15s and enough food to survive forever. So maybe this kind of caper is just exactly what's called for. And guess what? That's kind of what happened. It's got a little bit of everything, this story. I probably could discuss that story for 2 hours. Luckily, we limited ourselves to just 2 minutes by waiting for the end of the show to bring it up. Lots more to discuss for the rest of the week, of course, when we got all day tomorrow, Tuesday, as Joan McCarter will be out on break once again. And, dealing with all of the consequences of a big move there for her. So I know she needs some time to handle all of that stuff. And tell you what, if you need more time with more interesting stories, I've got the solution for you. It's Justice Putnam in the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next right here.
NetrootsRadio.com.
On exactly that place, Netroots Radio.
You've been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yes, well, now it's time for you to listen to Justice Putnam. He's got stuff from all around the country and around the world. Let me see if I can grab a representative sample. Energy experts say the Republican outrage over petroleum reserve sales is overblown. And GOP Representative Ted Budd of North Carolina got big bucks for opposing consumer protections against predatory lending.